So this is my second Facebook Live Q&A, just sort of hoping that everything is working. We have some people coming in to say hello. If you've got any questions, ask them in the comments bit that sort of pop up at the bottom. One of the things that happened last time I did this was that some people sort of saying that they'd asked a question and that I didn't answer it. The problem is that the comments come up quite at the bottom of the screen, if a lot of comments come in quick succession, they do sort of disappear up quite quickly. So forgive me for that. If it's been a little while and I've not answered your question, then do sort of ask it again and I'll see it. I wasn't deliberately trying to avoid answering any questions, so send them in. I'm just going to do something about the number of books I've rested my iPad on. That's probably a bit better. Hopefully we'll start getting some comments. Today's been quite interesting. I wasn't in the chamber this morning for when the Great Repeal, or the Repeal Bill as it's now called, was laid before the House. I was off doing some stuff at the Department of Transport, but clearly that's a big moment. I don't think it doesn't mean that anything is being debated for now. It just means that this bill that's going to deliver Brexit is now, or is going to deliver a large part of the legislative programme for Brexit, is now up and running and ready for us to debate. I think probably it will come back to be debated in September. Maybe we'll talk about Brexit and the repeal bill later on. But Shirley, thank you. I was really worried that the comments thing wasn't working, and so your comment being the first is very helpful. Tells me that the technology is working as it should. Thank you. I'm glad you think it's a good idea. The Walton bypass. I mean, I think it's good news in so much as this bypass fund, for the first time, is going to sort of be a sort of dedicated fund that non-trunk routes can access for significant sort of improvement. One of the things that happened between sort of 97 and 2010 is that a lot of the major A roads that connected sort of market towns were detrunked, which meant that they became the responsibility of local councils rather than Highways England. And that means that all improvements for those roads, like the A39 and the A361, have to be funded from sort of local county council funds, and our councils just don't have that sort of money. So I'm glad that this money's been made available and bypasses can once again be funded by central government. Matt Kearney asks, what do I think about Corbyn and Sturgeon's meeting with Michel Barnier? Do you know what, Matt? I haven't seen much about it. When I just came back into the office then, I did see on the news that they were giving a press conference, and I think I saw an interview earlier today when sort of Corbyn was sort of stood with his bag outside the Berlamont building. So I don't know what they've been saying. Look, easiest thing to say is that what are they doing? It's the negotiations on Brexit are between the United Kingdom government and the European Union, and neither the leader of the opposition nor the First Minister of Scotland therefore have any direct say in it. But I don't think that. I think it's perfectly reasonable that the leader of the opposition should go out to Brussels and inform himself on what the position of Brussels might be on certain tactics that we're adopting. His job is to hold the government to account, so I don't begrudge him that at all. Nicola Sturgeon, she doesn't have a direct voice in it, but I guess it's perfectly reasonable for her to have a dialogue with the EU of her own, in order that, again, she can sort of make sure that the UK government is batting in Scotland's interest. So I'll probably see the news later on and regret saying that, because it'll turn out that they've caused all sorts of trouble for us. But my sense is that it's perfectly reasonable for them to go out to the EU and sort of have that conversation. Drazilla, lots of talk in government re-improving mental health services, but not much clarity or detail yet. What are your thoughts? I agree. I think that's a very fair analysis. I think that the sort of soundbite of parity of esteem is sort of well worn now, it's time to start resourcing that. Now, what does that actually mean? I think it's inescapable that it means more money. there is a disparity between the money that we're putting into to physical illness and injury and the amount that we're putting into mental illness and injury. And I think the sort of understanding that a lot of some mental illness comes about as a result of a sort of single moment when your mental health becomes injured and you become ill. But a lot of it is quite a sort of slow process towards becoming, initially you become sort of emotionally ill, and then that sort of starts to transition from sort of low mood to proper full-on mental health. And I think, so you ask, what does parity of esteem mean? I think actually that one of the most important parts of parity between mental and physical health will be a far greater understanding. And we're starting to get our head around physical public health challenges like tackling obesity, tackling smoking, worrying about what people are eating and drinking, all of those sorts of things. I think we should be similarly engaged in tackling sort of public mental health. And then, of course, beyond that, we need to make sure that we've got the community mental health care services that are required. My view of mental health in Somerset at the moment is that too much, it's sort of, it's nothing, and then there's crisis facilities. And then when you're sort of ready to come out of a crisis facility, there's no step-down facility either. I know that I'm probably being unkind, there is a bit, but broadly that's what it is. And I'd just rather see a mental health provision that was not so focused on the acute and recognised that sort of crisis houses, step-up, step-down facilities, a greater number of sort of CAMs, community mental health workers. I think that would actually really help to achieve the parity of esteem, and in the long run would save a lot of money, because the crisis facilities are the really expensive ones, and if you can engage with people and intervene before they hit crisis, that's just a much better way of running mental health services, in my view. Now, I missed a comment. I'll see if I can scroll back down. There we go. Jan Hughes, who is one of my very, very regular contributors on the comments of my Facebook page. Burnham-on-Sea Love Lane Surgery are going to cancel warfarin monitoring because they can't get anyone to do it. Will you now admit that there is a problem in the NHS locally? Well, Jan, I should have said that Jan very rarely posts anything good about what I do on Facebook, but this was quite widely reported the other day, Jan, in the local papers and on burnhamonsea.com. I think that they can get people to do warfarin testing in Burnham-on-Sea because the Highbridge Medical Centre has got somebody to do it, and the Highbridge Medical Centre is taking on people from the Burnham-on-Sea Medical Centre's list, and a number have transitioned. Many, many more are switching to use a different drug other than warfarin, which doesn't require the same sort of testing regime. But the Burnham-on-Sea practice has made a decision that they have been unable to recruit, and they've decided to hand back the money. So there's not a financial issue, and that they're not going to offer that service anymore. That is far from ideal, but I have been speaking to the chairman of the patient participation group and other members of the PPG, as well as the practice and local clinicians. And whilst it is far from ideal that important service is not being offered in both practices, I am thus far satisfied that everybody who has been unable to change off warfarin onto a different drug with a different tasting regime has been able to transfer to the Highbridge Medical Centre, where they do have somebody who does that testing, and they are very happy to take those people onto their books. And I believe that Symphony in due course may well look at whether or not they could offer that service more broadly in the town from the other two medical centres, the Barrow Road one and the Love Lane one. So that could be a development in the future. Dorothy, come on, James, get those Conservative backbenchers behind Theresa May so she can get on with governing the country and get on with Brexit. Do they want a Labour government? Dorothy, I don't know what they want. I do find it really strange. It's no secret that the general election campaign did not go as well for us as we wanted it to, as well as we thought it was going to. It was... I think we just had the wrong message, and we failed to connect with people as well as we should have done. But Theresa May won a bigger vote share than David Cameron had won. And although she won less seats, we've still got significantly more seats than the Labour Party. I agree with you that, therefore, what we must do is get behind Theresa May. I don't think she's going to lead us into the next general election. I don't think that anybody's pretending. I don't think she even wants to. But she is by far the best person to be running this country right now. And I think that, you know, the idea that Corbyn could step in is just laughable. I mean, I think the man would be dangerous, and I know there'll be people who will jump up very, very quickly to defend him. He has a very, very loyal following, but fundamentally his plans for our country just involve taxing businesses out of business, borrowing more than we could ever afford to borrow, and just giving everybody everything without any regard for the sort of state that might leave the country in for the future. So, Dorothy, I agree. I think my colleagues should be getting behind the Prime Minister. Doesn't mean that they can't offer criticism of things that they don't like. Doesn't mean they can't represent their constituents with all of the sort of passion and rigour that you would expect. But fundamentally, what this country needs right now more than anything else is the government to get on with trying to govern. And the last thing it needs is another election. There we go. Jill Wickings. Are you speaking up in Parliament for the Chennai 6, James? These men should be brought home now. Jill, this is the pitfall of doing this live, and I suppose if I was a proper pro, I would have somebody sort of filtering the comments so that I don't read out comments that I don't know very much about. I don't really know much about the Chennai 6. Will you email me on james.heappey.mp@parliament.uk, and I will look into that, educate myself, and maybe I can come back to you with an email or a letter in due course once I've found out a bit more about what that's about. Sorry for not being able to answer you straight away. Drazilla, thanks for the answer, completely agree. Interesting. Yeah, so please, you just got my email address, james.heappey.mp@parliament.uk. Drusilla, do drop me a line. Be really interested in taking that forward. I've learned a lot from engaging with mental health practitioners and clinicians locally in Somerset. It'd be great to compare notes and see what you think. Ed Davey, I assume that's not Ed Davey, who used to be the Secretary of State for Energy, but if it is, hello Ed. Hi James, is the new apprenticeship levy damaging for apprenticeships, given there's been a 75% drop in starts since its introduction? Ed, I think the jury is out. I would agree that with the premise of the question that, you know, there has been a drop, and it does seem to rather coincide with the introduction of the levy. Two other things though that I have picked up when I've been visiting businesses around the Wells constituency. So firstly, as I understand it, the level 3 apprenticeship, the level 1 apprenticeship is now a 2-year course in some areas, and a lot of local small firms have said that if you're taking on an apprentice and you've got to have them on your books as an apprentice for 2 years, and for the first year that apprentice spends most of their time away at college, in a classroom, in a workshop, learning skills, then yes, at the end of that year you get a higher quality apprentice for the second year of the apprenticeship, then on the shop floor. But for a small business, paying for somebody who's not there for a year, even on the reduced wages that apprentices get, is very challenging. And so I found that a number of small businesses in the constituency have decided to no longer take on apprentices because of that length of course issue. The second is that a number of them tell me that they found the process of taking on an apprentice quite bureaucratic. Now that, in fairness, has not been my experience when I've been speaking to the business development teams, the people who sort of find new companies to offer apprenticeships at Stroke College, Bridgewater College and Western College. I think that they're on the front foot, and they bend over to try and make the process as easy for businesses as possible. But I do think that it's it is a great shame that the number of apprentices is falling. I think that is a very, very important route for people to take from education into the workplace by going through that apprenticeship route. My personal view is that we are probably pushing more people than we should into university, and that for many, many people they could achieve just as much, perhaps even more, if they had gone through an apprenticeship route and vocational and technical training, rather than sort of pushing on through A levels and university to end up in a career that they could have easily reached, in fact could have surpassed, had they gone through the technical and vocational route. So apprenticeships are hugely important in developing that pipeline, and whether it's the levy or whether it's the course length or whether it's bureaucracy, we need to get a grip of it and get those apprenticeship numbers going back up as soon as we can. Dorothy, pleasure. Simon, hello. Is the House of Lords, with a huge Lib Dem and Labour majority, totally intent on disruption within the legislative system? Any plans to be considered on reform of the House? Well, I think so. I mean, I think the Lords is always in the sort of limelight for reform, Simon. I think we have to be careful about the sort of language we use about the Lords. When they oppose stuff that was in the manifesto of the elected government from the House of Commons, they are clearly overreaching themselves, and they are breaking conventions that have stood for a long, long time. And frankly, it's because of those conventions that the Lords have survived so long, because that's how the Lords effectively makes itself accountable to democracy, in that it does not fundamentally interfere with manifesto commitments and sort of government spending money matters. And in the last year, the Lords has shown that it is willing to break up those conventions, and I think that we do need a bicameral legislature. All the great democracies of the world have a bicameral legislature, but if the Lords is going to seek to become a genuine sort of agenda-setting, policy-making legislature in its own right, rather than just a sort of check and balance and scrutineer of the work of the House of Commons, then we have got to look at Lords reform very, very urgently indeed. Because the mandate that I have as an elected representative of my constituency is, well, I mean, I have a mandate. Somebody appointed to the Lords because they were David Cameron's mate doesn't. And I think that we have to be very clear about the way that, what the Lords is there for, and if that's not what they want to do, then we need to sort of make sure that we reform that chamber so that they have a mandate with which to do what they want to do. Although, of course, the Lords probably wouldn't look much like it looks like now in terms of its composition if that chamber was directly elected. Oh, interesting, Jill. Okay. So Jill has just clarified what the Chennai Six are. I'll have a look into that and I'll come back to you. That's interesting. Ewan, I'm aware the boundary changes were spoken about frequently pre-election. Is there any further information on the government's plans for this in the future? Dunno. So I think that the boundary changes have sort of disappeared off the radar. I suspect because not all colleagues were going to be particularly keen on those boundary changes, with the parliamentary arithmetic as it is, Ewan, I think stuff like that is not going to win, that is clearly not going to win support, just has to be shelved for another day. And let's be clear, people sort of dress the boundary changes up as gerrymandering, whatever else. The reality is it's absolutely not. There is a massive democratic deficit in this country. I represent nigh on 80,000 people, nigh on 80,000 registered voters. There's well over 100,000 people who live in the constituency of all ages. And yet there are other constituencies in the country where there are 35,000 constituents. That in fairness is the opposite extreme. And the Isle of Wight constituency, by contrast, there are 100,000 voters there. But the average is sort of 60 to 65, around 65,000. So actually, already your votes in the Wells constituency are worth less than the vote in the average constituency, because you are 1/80,000th of the electorate, whereas others are 1/65,000th of the electorate. And so those boundary changes were much needed just to sort of equalise the number of voters in each constituency. Thank you. Gosh, we got to the end of the comments very quickly. We got through those very quickly indeed. Last time round, they just sort of kept on coming all the way through. So I will talk a bit about... Greg got in there just as I was about to have to start busking. New housing estates in and around Wales have not yet been connected to superfast broadband. New legislation states housing estates should be connected, and we are still waiting. Please tell me what can be done to resolve this problem. So you're right, Greg. Legislation does require that new build houses have to be connected to superfast broadband. I am aware that phase 1 of the Crest Nicholson development and phase 1 of the Barrett development did not. And I'm already engaged with the developers of both of those estates on exactly that issue. I have a feeling, although I'm not, in fact, I'm pretty sure I remember reading, this was maybe 5-6 weeks ago that I was dealing with this, but I have a feeling that the phase 1 of the Crest Nicholson development, for example, that the planning permission was passed before that requirement was in law. But I'm just going off a sort of distant memory there. But I mean, the bottom line is it's ridiculous to build a house now without superfast broadband. It's like building a house without water or connection to an energy source. What can be done? Well, if the developer has scrimped on a legal requirement, then they will be held to account, because it is a planning condition that they connect superfast broadband, and we will need to take that up with the Department for Communities and Local Government and the local planning authority, and I'm very happy to do that. If when the planning permission for whichever development that you're referring to particularly if that requirement wasn't in place at that point, then your properties will be in the mix for the second phase of the Connecting Devon and Somerset state aid rollout. So all is not lost. I will just need to check exactly sort of whether or not the estate you're on is included in phase 2, which is being delivered by GigaClear over the next couple of years. Greg, I have seen you pop up on social media a bit. I don't know if I've seen an email from you necessarily, but I will get my team to dig that email out for me. And if you haven't sent me an email, if you've just been doing it all through Facebook and Twitter, then do drop me an email. But I know you have been trying to get hold of me. I was pretty sure that we had replied to you, but I will get the team to dig that out, and I'll send you whatever we've sent back, and we'll engage in that, because it all depends which estate you're on is the key. There you are. Thank you. So the interesting thing about this place is I'm just going to talk for a little while until someone else pops up with a question. But I was just supporting a minister in my new PPS job in the chamber for the adjournment debate, which was really interesting. It was amazing the things you hear. I hadn't realised that before now, if you had an accident on private land and you had been sort of drunk behind the wheel, that you couldn't be, that often you wouldn't be held sort of accountable in the same way as you would be if you had been driving on a road. And a colleague of mine, Alex Shelbrook, was raising the case of a young boy who was killed by a piece of farm machinery that was being driven by someone who was twice over the legal limit. And in the end, instead of getting 14 years in prison like he would have done if he'd been found guilty under criminal drink driving laws, he ended up with 16 months in prison. for drunk driving with a tractor, because on private land he got done under health and safety legislation rather than sort of criminal dangerous driving legislation. But the minister has said that they will review that loophole in the law. It's ridiculous that you can drive on private land drunk and cause that sort of damage, killing someone, and not be held criminally accountable. But after that debate, I went into the tea room where Bill Cash, who's a sort of lifelong Eurosceptic, was sort of sitting enjoying a cup of tea, and absolutely fascinating sort of hear his sort of take on Brexit and the repeal bill that was laid before Parliament today. I don't agree with all that Bill says, but he, like Ken Clarke, actually, I mean, there's never been any inconsistency in what he said on Brexit. From the sort of the moment he went into politics, he was passionately in favour of leaving the European Union. He was a big rebel over Maastricht, but just really interesting to sort of see his take on the bill and to hear his view on what the repeal bill is. And what's really interesting is that the newspapers and the TV news today, I suspect, will interpret this bill, this repeal bill, as something that gives Parliament, or ministers, the ability to just do as they please with the legislation that surrounds Brexit. I haven't yet read the bill in full, but from what I've read of it so far, it's clear to me that the overwhelming majority of legislation from the EU that has been enshrined in UK law as a result of our membership of the EU will just transition automatically across into UK law and will require no amendment whatsoever. But there are, about 1,000, potentially up to 1,000 pieces of legislation, which is, as a slice of the pie as a whole, is not that big, but 1,000 pieces of legislation that will require some amendments. Some of those amendments will be tiny, tiny technical things just to make it work as a piece of standalone UK legislation. Other bits will be slightly more meaningful. But Parliament could not possibly legislate on all of those things in the time available between now and when we leave the EU. And so, I'm a parliamentarian, and of course I want to feel like I have the ability to scrutinise in full the work on the government, the work of the government on your behalf. But at the same time, there is scrutinising for the sake of scrutinising, when actually a lot of the legislation that that will require these powers to be used is almost irrelevant. I think is just, frankly, I think it's an argument being made by those who just refuse to accept that we've got to leave the European Union because that's what people voted for. But we'll see how this sort of pans out. I think it's going to be, the first time we debate it will be in September, so that'll be the next time it gets voted on. I think that there's a real challenge for the Labour Party, who have been sort of suggesting that the Labour Party being suggested they now might vote against the repeal bill. Well, at second reading, which is just to sort of agree with the sort of principles of the bill, it would be inconsistent to do that when they had voted for the withdrawal bill previously. But we'll see what comes. I think, ladies and gents, Parliament is going to be, in equal measure, brilliant and bizarre over the next 2 years. There will be moments when the debate is really high calibre, with really bright people saying really intelligent things about what needs to be done to make Brexit happen, and there are going to be other moments when it's just pantomime, and you'll have to bear with us when those moments come. But I hope that people can sort of engage in this stuff constructively and genuinely work, I think, to sort of deliver the right outcome for Brexit, and sort of all this, the good deal stuff. That's what the Prime Minister talks about, but what we as legislators should be talking about is sort of making sure that it's sound legislation, that Brexit is going to work when implemented within the UK economy and as UK law, and we should really be focusing on that rather than sort of just endlessly in a tug of war over whether we should be leaving or not. What was your journey to making the decision to become an MP and then making it happen? So I decided to become an MP quite late in the day. I can't tell you that it's what I'd always wanted to do. I joined the army and sort of went through being a junior officer, thinking that I sort of was hoping one day that I might be a general. And that was my view, and and I was working really, really hard to sort of become a major and a company commander and then a battalion commander and all that. I was working really, really hard to do that all the way through until I was in my early 30s. But then I got posted to the Ministry of Defence here in Whitehall. I saw a bit of the sort of workings of government and a bit of what it's like up here. And there is a real sense that for all of the criticism of Parliament, for all of the criticism of politicians and government, this is where stuff gets done. And if you want to change things, if you want to sort of contribute to the direction of our country, this is the place to do it. Sort of add to that a bit of frustration, perhaps, about the politicians that had come to see us out in Iraq and Afghanistan. Very few of them, in my view, seem to sort of really want to look people in the eye and connect and sort of talk about what they felt and and have a conversation. And I wondered whether I might be able to do that. So I gave it a go. And then I had to work pretty hard. My predecessor was well dug in. She was very, she did a lot of stuff. And I had to match that, work just as hard, do just as much, and show people that I could do as good a job or even better. And who knows? That's what we're doing. But we're now won 2 elections, and so far so good. We'll keep trying. Jim, are you concerned that your party's deal with the DUP places the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland under pressure? As how can the British government be perceived as a neutral arbiter? Jim, I think it's a perfectly reasonable question. I think that the Northern Ireland Secretary is actually has actually been very clear that he and that he is able to act neutrally, despite the fact that he is de facto a member of the government that is in a confidence supply relationship with the DUP. A lot of people have wrongly characterised the £1 billion in additional funds that have been found for Northern Ireland. People have wrongly characterised that as a bung for the DUP. The reality is that's additional money for Northern Ireland to be spent in all communities by all parties across Northern Ireland. And I think that, as I understand it, within the agreement, the confidence and supply agreement that we have with the DUP, it is very clear that there is no leverage for them on constitutional matters when it comes to sort of the Good Friday Agreement and the clauses within that. I'm not expert on exactly what those provisions are because I wasn't involved in the forming of that agreement, but I do genuinely believe that the Northern Ireland Secretary can be an arbiter. I think that the Prime Minister and the Taoiseach are both very comfortable with the arrangement. Clearly Sinn Féin are less comfortable with it, but I think you'd probably expect that. Northern Irish politics is arguably even more polarised than our sort of Labour Conservative politics on the mainland at the moment. But I think that it's clear that reapplying direct rule is not in the best interest of Northern Ireland, and I hope that Sinn Féin will sort of sit down and start talking about getting the power sharing executive back in place as soon as possible. And I think it's completely reasonable that the UK government can act as a neutral arbiter in that process. But I had you asked me about sort of things like the Northern Irish border, I would have sort of expressed a slightly greater concern. I'm still not sure that we know how. I'm still not sure that the government really knows how that's going to be done. There are all sorts of political sensitivities in that, and we're going to have to sort of make sure that the right deal is done, because a hard border is pretty much unacceptable to everybody. Putting a border on the sort of ferry ports and airports between Northern Ireland and the mainline would be totally unacceptable to the Unionists, because that effectively creates a barrier within Great Britain. So a real challenge. Maybe those who are sort of arguing that you can have an enforceable border without any hard border posts through the use of technology. Maybe they're right. Maybe that's the answer. but it's clearly very challenging. I think that is actually probably the single most challenging part of the whole Brexit process, how we manage that Northern Irish border, whilst taking account of age-old political sensitivities in the province. Jim, that was the last question I have. So if anybody is still watching, and we've done quite well on viewing numbers today, I think we're probably slightly up on last time round. But if anybody wants to pop a question, there we go. Jan, gosh, you see, there we go. It's interesting. One day, I will get you. You'll say something nice. You don't need to reply to me, but your body language changed on this question. I don't believe you are comfortable with your answer. In no way can you say this deal was anything other than to keep you in power. Well, Jan, it's really interesting because, I mean, of course, the reason that we have a confidence and supply agreement with the DUP is in order to be able to have a workable majority within the House of Commons. And that's the way a parliamentary democracy works. Now, it's really important to understand that the votes of a DUP MP are worth absolutely no more or less than the vote of any other MP, but they have just as much right to represent their constituents and use the leverage of their vote when getting things from the government as I do or any other MP does. And when you are building a coalition, although this is not a formal coalition, but when you're building that within the House of Commons, those are the deals that are done. There's been lots written in the papers about the deals that Labour offered to the DUP in 2010. There have been books written about the deal making that was done to form a coalition in 2015. Lots of people don't like coalitions. That's why. That's arguably why the Lib Dems did so badly in May 2015, because people were trying to avoid a coalition. But the fact is that when the election result reflects the will of the country. The country didn't want any one party to have power entirely to itself, and so there was a requirement to form a deal. Now, clearly the Labour Party were never ever going to do a deal with the Conservatives, ever. The Liberal Democrats, who had done a deal with us previously in 2010, had said that they would not do a deal with either the Conservatives or the Labour Party after this general election. The SNP were never going to do a deal with the Conservatives, and neither would Plaid Cymru or Caroline Lucas, the Green MP. So that left the DUP. Now you could say, oh well, then you shouldn't have gone into a deal with them at all. But the reality is that with 314 seats, because Sinn Féin don't take their seats, a combination of all of the other parties, less the DUP, still would not have ended up with more seats than the Conservatives had on 314. So any governing coalition, be that a Labour coalition or a Conservative coalition, would have had to have had DUP support, and their price for that support would have been the same come what may. And if nobody had done a deal with the DUP, then we would have had another election, and we might have got a different result. But you know what? I reckon we'd have probably got pretty much the same result. And if we got pretty much the same result, then we'd have been in exactly the same place with exactly the same parliamentary arithmetic. And we'd have had to, that is the reality of a parliamentary democracy, that those deals have to be done. And you say about the body language, I don't dispute it. There are lots and lots and lots of things with which I do not agree with the DUP. And I said that in this session a couple of weeks ago. I said it in a couple of my vlogs. But fundamentally, I think that we had the Scottish referendum in 2014, a general election in 2015, the EU referendum in 2016, and then another general election in 2017. We cannot have another general election. We need to try and make government work. And if the Liberal Democrats have a sort of an epiphany and decide that they want to start doing deals again in order to get their policies to be part of government, and they want to sort of support some of the things that we're doing, then that's great. That reduces the leverage of the DUP, and I suspect that most people would welcome that from the Lib Dems, but they have shown no willingness to do that thus far, and so the only way that anybody could run the country right now, Corbyn or Theresa May, would be through having the DUP in their voting column in order to get legislation through the House of Commons. Jan, you have just... I'm going to take a little screenshot of that. Thank you very much indeed. I know that hostilities will resume very, very soon, but thank you. I'm glad that that answer was good, and genuinely one of the nice things about doing this is that every now and then I perhaps get to surprise people, and I'm glad that you enjoyed that answer, and that you're right. One of the reasons I'm doing these Facebook Live sessions is that I think that I very, very rarely actually as an MP do you get to speak to your constituents in a sort of way like this. There's no way that we would be able to talk for 45 minutes about all of these different issues if I bumped into you at your village fete. And there's absolutely no way that we'll be able to do it if I was relying on the local newspapers or the local radio, because they have an editorial line, and B, they just don't have the space to report things at this length. And I just thought it was quite important to do this as a way of just, hopefully I've not missed any questions out tonight, and I aim to do that because I think, I want people to think that I'm doing my best to answer people's questions, and that you can sort of see things a bit from my perspective, and that might help, not necessarily to get people to vote for me, because a lot of people are just pretty fixed in the way that they vote, but whether you vote for me or not, just to sort of get an insight into why I'm doing the things that I'm doing, why I'm sort of voting the way that I vote, and maybe why things are the way they are up here. And also, when there are local things, to be able to pick those up too. We've not had much local stuff tonight, whereas last time it sort of went from the international to the hyper local. But that's fine. We'll keep doing these and see what people make of them. Unless people sort of put up any more questions, I will probably sign off in the next minute or two. We've been going for sort of 42, 43 minutes. So I thought I'd just say that tomorrow I've got an excellent date. I always try on a Friday. My sort of ideal Friday is to sort of visit a school, a community group, a business, and do a surgery, and then to just do one more thing during the day that is sort of a bit of a surprise. So tomorrow I'm off to Heappey School, I think. Hang on, I'm going to cheat and look at my diary. So tomorrow I am off to... I am off to Heappey School. Oh, amazing. I am also going to Charlie Bigham, which is a real success story. I mentioned it in my vlog last week. I don't know, you have to be a Waitrose shopper, I think, to be able to buy his pies at the moment, I think. I don't know if they're sold anywhere else. And I must admit that I've not actually had one yet. But he is bringing a manufacturing facility to the old Dulcote Quarry, creating 200 jobs. And I'm going to go and see that tomorrow, which would be fantastic. I've sort of had to help out with a few bits and bobs along the way, like trying to get their sewage plumbed in with Wessex Water, trying to get their electricity sorted with Western Power Distribution, and I think we're still in helping them in a fight with BT over their broadband. So there you go, Greg. It's not just new build houses, it's new build factories as well, for which broadband is an issue. But I'm really looking forward to going seeing that new factory tomorrow. It's the number of times I hear people say in the Mendip end of the constituency about sort of the loss of manufacturing, and I understand why people feel so strongly about that. There we go. Richard Greenwell, who works in Wells Tesco, reminds me that they sell them in Tesco's in Wells as well. But it's great to see sort of proper, meaningful, big manufacturing facility coming back to Mendip. And then on top of that, those great jobs that were announced at Clark's last week, which is really good. And if you sort of add to that the growing job opportunities down at Hinckley, and there's a lot of stuff going on the Isleport estate as well in sort of Burnham and Highbridge. We're in quite a good place. In fact, and it's too late in the session to really sort of go into much detail, but maybe we'll come back to this next time. Increasingly, I'm finding that our challenge locally is that businesses are struggling to find enough people to make up their workforce. So it's great that we've got these businesses coming. That's really great for our economy, and these are good jobs too. But we just need to give some thought to how we develop locally in order to make sure that we meet the needs of that growing economy. That is 6:45. So thank you very much indeed for tuning in. Those who sort of sat quietly and watched from afar, I hope that you found it useful and enjoyable. Those who asked questions, thank you very, very much indeed for participating. And I will see you in a couple of weeks. And watch out for my vlogs. If you're not receiving my vlog each week at the moment, then just drop me an email on james.heapey.mp@parliament.uk. And we will get you signed up, and then just every week I send people sort of a 3 or 4 minute video just talking about what I've been up to and what I think is going on in the world. And if you've enjoyed this, you might find that interesting too. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.